last, finally, we've seen something that we've not seen in a long time. And that's McLaren completing a race weekend with no self-inflicted foul-ups. And with now Lando affected by a marshal's or steward's decision, I bet Andrea Stella has the FIA now on speed dial and will come for them in the dead of night. As we saw Oscar Piastri silence his critics, namely Sky Sports, and pull the complete 180 in terms of their opinions on him. To illustrate how quickly I think Oscar Piastri is learning in his time in Formula 1, just back in Zandvoort a couple of races ago, he did not have the confidence in his car and against Leclerc to lick the stamp and send it into turn 1. He admits in the cooldown room to Charles that he had to go for it, and it was a 50-50 shot whether he would make it out in one piece or not. Well, he did, and he caught Charles Leclerc napping. And what was really annoying is that I had to take a comfort break in the middle of the race, and that was when Oscar took the lead. I didn't see him doing it live. I'm not making this up, I'm really not. But after that, I was completely stressed about the situation. Much like how I must stress upon you that I've now released an Oscar Piastri-inspired shirt, which you can find right here, link down below. Granted, Oscar's medium tyre usage wasn't as polished, but according to the pundits, only Mercedes had done any meaningful hard tyre running during practice on Friday, so this was a big leap of faith, and now Oscar has a win without any McLaren-related shenanigans about it. Albeit, it wasn't a straightforward one, and it wasn't just one where he would cross the line at top speed because there was that virtual safety car right at the end between Sainz and Checo, their crash. I will get to that later, because there is a little bit to talk about that, even though they have diffused the situation. But I would just like Oscar's next win to just be a straightforward win, please. And yes, I am aware of the supposed mini DRS rear wing people have spotted on the McLaren, but look, it's not cheating. It has passed the supposed stress tests, and if Multiviewer on Twitter is anything to go by, looking through the rules of the FIA in Formula 1, they'll only render it illegal if it has the potential to fail and be stuck open, as that would be unsafe. Look, we can't cry foul for every single innovation that comes around in Formula 1. That's part and parcel of what the game is, and the whole thing about Red Bull and what they were coming up with, their supposed brake solution, that's an innovation. The blown diffuser of Brawn, which everyone heralds as a triumph for Tour de Force. Isn't it obvious? All these other teams were caught napping. They make this thing like Mercedes made their DAS solution back in 2020, and rather spend money and time and resources on trying to make their own version, it's a lot cheaper to complain to the FIA and get them to ban it, so that means that team who came up with that innovation paid all of that money for a thing they cannot use. But now it's become quite clear, unless the FIA renders it illegal because it's unsafe, like I just mentioned, and Multiviewer said, then they've got no choice but to make their own version, and that will take time. And I know you're probably going to call me biased anyway, but I'm sure the engineers out there, they're going to be nodding their heads at this and going, clever. And I didn't want to take an Oscar slot with this stuff too much anyway, but I feel like I had to comment on it. But in terms of Piastri himself, this was the race which has now gotten him into the conversation of being an elite F1 driver. This was also third time lucky in a battle against Charles Leclerc. We saw him against Charles in Monaco, we saw him again during Zandvoort, and now, third time's the charm, he's been able to learn what it takes to beat Charles. And Charles admits that he was caught on the back foot. He was hoping that Oscar had worn out his tyres in trying to keep up with him and keeping up the chase and stuff like that, but that just did not come to pass because of the fact that the McLaren was a lot quicker than he thought, and also, as Charles said in his post-race interviews, it had something to do with the fact that McLaren could just activate its tyres much quicker than they could, so his outlap, Charles, was not good enough. And now he's won his second Grand Prix, I saw during the post-race bits that the F1 graphics department, they are milking this to the ends of the earth, saying that Oscar has now scored the most out of anybody in the last 7 races. And then it'll be the last 7 races in the next one. They're going to be realising that, oh, there could be 4 people in terms of the title and stuff like that, but I'm thinking that's a bit too premature. Oscar's got a bit of a tall order with that, and then there's Lando, there's Charles and all that stuff. But come on, we saw what happened in 2021. Speaking of beverages, Franco Colapinto came back from a prang in FP2, which got the Logan Sargent fans up in arms, to not only get Williams into Q3 alongside Albon, but also finishing where he started on the grid in 8th place. And you can easily say it's because of Franco's good work on Sunday, the 4 points that he acquired, those 4 points were enough to get Williams past Alpine for 8th in the Constructors, which was their end of season goal, and they've already done it. And now they can actually look at Haas and Racing Bulls over there and go, lovely. I actually said on Twitter that if Franco did score points here, that I would chug a pint of cola. Because, you know, a little bit endearing of namesake, Franco Colapinto. Don't get the phone. Right there, pint glass, all that stuff. Cheers, Franco. Well done. Oh, that's cold. In all seriousness though, Franco has done a brilliant job in endearing himself to Formula One's audience, and I bet you that by season's end, everyone will be sad to see him go, either back to F2 for 2025, or ending up in reserve driver purgatory, with only the hope of stepping back into Williams should Carlos Sainz skip town after 2026 and cheat on James. He is now a national hero in Argentina. This is the first time an Argentinian racer has scored in Formula One since 1982, and Carlos Reutemann did it. And also, this is the first time a South American driver has scored points in Formula One in the 2020s. In this decade, Franco was the first one to do it. This is actually more of an achievement than what Liam Lawson did. Now, of course, I was really sad to see Logan Sargent go and be canned, but you've got to admit, even if you're a Logan Sargent supporter, that the decision to replace him with Colapinto has been more than justified by 300%, as well as being a really good personality. And I love the fact that the media department over at Williams were telling Franco, just shut up, you're talking too much. Come on, he's excited, let him talk. And it's just making me think that, you know what, maybe James was right. That Williams car is pretty sound, so long as it can just shave off a bit more weight. Because its pace, at this rate, could be almost on top of Aston Martin. Now that's going to be interesting. Then we've got Lando Norris as a winner, and oh boy, that was a turnaround. On the Saturday, it looked over in terms of Lando's hunt for the title, thanks to who flew the yellow flag where, but then 24 hours later, he's still in the game, and it's steadily headed toward the likelihood of it going all the way to the Middle East. Now, okay, people were quick to run roughshod over Lando, but you got to admit, going from 15th to 4th, that's a really impressive fight back. And considering that Lando's confidence can easily be knocked, this was a really good response and showing that he is starting to believe in himself. And that's a really good response because on Saturday it looked all but over. Even if Max continued to finish 5th, that would have been 10 points. It would have wiped out all the work that Lando would have done in the time after the summer break. But no, he's actually managed to close the gap a little bit more. Granted, it's only by 3 points, but he was able to have a really good battle with Max Verstappen, get the fastest lap, so that extra point is counting. And that was after Max Verstappen tried to take that fastest lap from him, and he couldn't do it, Max. And yes, his teammate's performance at the front and getting it on the front row does deal a blow to his justification for being a team leader, and the whole papaya rule saga might come back into play. But Lando's recovery is something that he can be proud of. Then I've got Charles Leclerc as a winner, and even though he didn't win the race, I would say it was still something special from Charles, like he promised before the race weekend. Admittedly, he's not had the best of times in Formula One when it comes to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. He's done okay, and second place, that is actually his best result. During a period at the first stint, it looked like he was on zone to do it. He was about 5-6 seconds ahead of Oscar. Oscar had burnt through his tyres. It was all in control, but as Charles said, he was assuming a lot of things. He assumed that the McLaren would do one thing, it didn't do that. He assumed that Oscar would not take any risks, considering that he managed to beat Oscar twice before now in a straight-up battle. He then assumed wrong in turn 1 when Oscar did make the gamble, and then Charles just couldn't fight back. And then eventually, the dirty air, as Oscar had hoped, reaped its ugly head, and then just Charles fought back. He had no rear tyres, he was all done, and then he was very lucky to have not gotten involved in the scrap between Carlos and Checo. But I think both men should really be pleased with themselves, as this race will go down in F1 history as one of those classic battles that lasted the majority of the race, and that sometimes you don't need constant overtaking to make a race gripping, unlike Charles's rear tyres. Given where Ferrari were just a couple of months ago, to be contesting for wins and hard-fought wins, and Red Bull are nowhere, I think Ferrari will be happy with how Charles conducted himself, and that during Friday and Saturday, he was absolutely on fire. He finished Q3, he got pole by 3/10, and that is big. Bigger than anyone else, and Ferrari with Carlos were right there, so the pace is right there. So going into the last third of the season, I think Ferrari should be really happy with themselves. And Leclerc, his spirit's back, and even though he didn't win, he was really close to getting it and getting his best result ever and doing what he was able to do in F2 in 2017. So again, he should be really happy with this. This wasn't too bad, not too shabby. I would still call him a winner because he had a good clean fight, and I think his stock just rose up considerably even though he didn't get the victory. And most importantly, he did score more points than Max or Lando, so he is now just dragging himself into that title fight. That discussion that we talked about earlier in the week, it's still valid. Then we've got George, and even though the reverting back to their more trusted floor didn't get them back in the hunt for pole or for the win, their work with the hard tyre and practice proved its worth for George to be right there to reap the most reward out of the crash ahead of him. Sure, you could argue that, oh, George was only gifted a podium and that Oh, he didn't get it on merit. Well, the fact is, though, you've got to be in it to win it. And that's what happened in Austria. And I don't think Mercedes were expecting it either. So I think this was a welcome bit of fortune for them and something to be happy about, even though Lewis wasn't able to do it. And cue the sabotage allegations once again. Then we've got Albon. And even though his teammates stole a lot of attention from him this weekend, Alex quietly brought his car home to match his highest ever grid position for Williams in 7th place. He defended like a madman for the longest time. And he was only a few seconds behind Alonso in 6th. So I think this makes Williams' result all the more special, because this wasn't like a distant 7th or 8th away from everybody else. I feel like if Williams can really make the most of this and get more pace and upgrades and be toe-to-toe with Aston Martin, that'll be a bitter pill to swallow for Papa Stroll's team, albeit a very short-term pain given the fact that they did win out on the contract with Adrian Newey. James will just take this little victory that they were able to be up there with the 5th fastest team. They just got that little bit more to do. And if they can keep this up, then, you know, I think 6th place is definitely viable, like I mentioned in Colapinto's section. And also, this is a major turnaround from what we saw in Hungary, when Alex was just infuriated and disappointed with the way Williams were conducting themselves. No, this was far better from this team, and well done, Alex. And also, because he finished ahead of Franco in the race, people will actually forget this was the first time in a long time that Alex was out-qualified by his teammate. Ooh. Then there's Oliver Behrman, and yes, he did lose out to Franco Colapinto, the best driver that you could compare him to, but Oliver still did good and was the only Haas to score points, and it was also at Nico Hülkenberg's expense. It was really, really fascinating to see, and I'll talk about it in Nico's section in a moment. He's not a winner, by the way, but Oliver was able to make a good impression and be able to show to the world, and Ayo Komatsu's reckonings were somewhat accurate. To believe in Oliver does yield results, and Oliver now has the record of being, I think, the only driver to have scored for 2 different teams on debut, so that's a nice little record for him to have. So congratulations, Oliver. You have a legacy, and you're now starting to endear yourself, because I saw him in Ted's notebook, and he just looked so goofy and geeky and just pleased to be there. That was cute. That was more endearing. And to top it all off, Netflix are covering Haas this weekend, and Gunther Steiner was in the paddock. He was conducting the post-race interviews, so that's going to be really interesting if Netflix are covering that and then talking to Gunther on location. Surely he's going to be a talking head at this point. Then the last winner is Fernando Alonso. This is a great example of when Fernando is happy, then the team is happy. With the news of Adrian Newey headed their way soon still lingering in the air, nothing really matters for the Spaniard. Everything's good. As far as he's concerned, the pain is temporary. Nothing can bring him down now, so don't expect any negative radio comments anymore, because he'll be thinking, oh, all's good. Adrian's coming soon. I'm happy. So, yeah, and I'm really, really pleased. And also, I'm really glad I'm able to just show Lance Stroll that, hey, I still got it, you know, because there was a period not too long ago where Lance Stroll was saying, oh, I'm actually great, you know, I'm 4 for 4, make of it what you will, and stuff. And it's like, no, Fernando came in with the Palmer karma. And even though he didn't really have much to do this race, save for perhaps 2 Williams closing in, the car did have pace in it with him in the car. And it really goes to show that that guy can drag cars to places it really doesn't belong when his mind is in the right place. And that is something Aston Martin will be counting in spades for next year, especially when Newey can at least, you know, take a little glance at the AMR 25 on occasion while he's ensconced in the 2026 machine. And just as I touched upon in the Behrman section, we now get to the Meh section, and Nico Hülkenberg fronts it, and oh, okay, this is Nico Hülkenberg, but extremely salty. Did anyone pick up on that throughout the entire weekend? If I remember correctly, I think he was almost calling for team orders and to be allowed past Behrman. And then when he finished 11th, he claimed that he would have been 9th had it not been for misjudging the slowdown during the virtual safety car period. And then there was a brief green flag when it was at full speed, he got caught napping. And also I think what didn't help is that he did pick up debris after the collision, and therefore it just wasn't great. He just looked rattled, Nico, didn't he? It was really, really uncharacteristic. Usually he's quite unflappable unless Kevin Magnussen is still in the room, but still, Behrman did show him up, and Nico did okay. He was competent, and like I said, he was in contention for points. That Haas car looked fairly solid around here, but the fact is, though, it's just like, That was really surprising, and I really did not see that coming, so his conduct was not great. So it was but ultimately he didn't get points. And also, I think he's getting a little bit antsy for the fact that next year he probably is not going to be scoring that many points, if any, considering where Sauber are right now. That, yeah, sure, Sauber got the fastest pit stop in Baku, but what kind of comfort is that when their average for the season is 6 seconds? So it's going to be a long 2025 for Nico. And then I've got Pierre Gasly. Yeah, it's not much to be happy about, but considering that Pierre was disqualified from quali due to a fuel flow regulation which they claimed made the car slower, but Pierre finishing one place higher than his original grid slot of 13th, that's a pretty decent result. Gasly himself was happy with the way he carried himself, and considering that Alpine have now fallen down to 9th in the Constructors, this was not a good day for them, so Gasly did give them something to smile about, that hey, at least our car was competitive in the right pair of hands, and the pair of hands that's actually staying with us. They might be able to get a response against Williams, but it's hard to say. But either way, I think Pierre has managed to get something out of this weekend, and it makes me think that had he started in 13th, he might have gotten a point or two. Then, okay, you've been waiting for this, let's get to the losers, and Perez. Oh no. Oh, no, this is not good. Even though it was deemed to be a racing incident by the stewards and Checo wasn't at fault, that doesn't really matter in the eyes of Christian Horner and Helmut Marko. The result has basically undone all the good work Checo had done throughout the weekend. Him going as far as, and I think I can say this with a fair amount of conviction, him outclassing Max Verstappen. That's not been said in a very, very long time, arguably since last year's Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Checo was on a whole other level. He looked really, really planted and solid and competent. But now, after getting no points, that doesn't matter, because Red Bull have now slipped behind McLaren in the Constructors by now 20 points. They lost 28 points in one go. This was meant to be one of the races that Red Bull kept Checo around because he was good at and he could get some decent points, either managing to increase the gap to McLaren or limit the contraction. And that didn't happen. And, that's not good. And I think Daniel Ricciardo's somewhat smiling. And now there's even more pressure for him to do the deed in Singapore, one of his other good tracks. The team really didn't need this right now because it looked like on Friday they might have actually been able to find a solution on their floor with their mix and match bodge job. It looked okay. And Checo was able to do something with it. That car in the hands of Sergio was capable of winning that race, but it wasn't to be. So yeah, I thought Monza was their worst weekend, Red Bull. I think this now is even worse for the fact that there could have been so much more on the table for them, and it ultimately wasn't to be due to a freak accident. Then you got to mention Carlos Sainz. And whilst there is less running on Carlos in terms of his future, it's still not ideal for Ferrari to have to fix up his car in time for the next race in a few days. When you look at the top-down angle, it's a little bit more of a weird situation, that Carlos was maintaining the racing line, and he was sort of closing the door. Checo was then putting himself in there. When Carlos spotted Checo, it was too late for him to react, so he couldn't try and take evasive action. Otherwise, it might have knocked Checo off, so that means he would have been even more hot water. It was really, really close and very unusual as well that they would just pitch like that. It was just really strange. And yeah, Ferrari did lose points, but they didn't lose as many points as Red Bull did. But apart from that, Carlos was on for a solid result after a pretty good qualifying session. It was just a lost opportunity for some silverware. But at least Ferrari were able to demonstrate they're back in the game, unlike Red Bull. And speaking of, this was probably Max's least comfortable race in a while. Not only was he stuck behind multiple drivers and could do little to actually stop that, but his car offered very little in terms of, well, just being a pleasurable experience. And sure, Austin might be able to get Max back into the mix somewhat and maybe a chance for a podium, but now that I think about it more and more, and now Helmut Marko has come on the record saying, oh, well, the Constructors Championship is pretty much dead in the water, I'm not really so sure this will be actually the solution that they really, really need, and they might have to wait until next year to get it, because a lot of the upgrades lately that Red Bull have been bringing, they've either under-delivered or they've just gone sideways, as in they fixed one problem and then another one rears its ugly head. They can't really get a good return on their investment when it comes to the wind tunnel and the production, so I can't say with full conviction their Austin upgrade will fix the problem. There's a degree of uncertainty that I've not seen in Red Bull for a very long time. And put simply, Sergio was the better of the two Red Bull drivers this weekend, even though his incident with Sainz ultimately cancelled it out. Norris still outscored Max despite starting 15th, and if the timing of flags and safety cars had thrown him off enough, Alonso might have nabbed 5th place from him because Max went in for soft tyres to take the fastest lap away from Lando and failed due to the incident involving his teammate, so Red Bull couldn't even get a chance to do that. Yikes. And then it's not good for the other Red Bull team either. Granted, Tsunoda's retirement wasn't his fault, but the pace seemingly wasn't there to do anything of great value. Then there's Daniel Ricciardo reporting excessive graining that he wasn't expecting, and sure, he finished 13th, it was reasonable. I mean, he was finishing on the same main lap. That car has really gone off the boil, and again, in Monza, they brought upgrades, and I couldn't really tell. And then Tsunoda, he had that issue, he couldn't really do anything, even though he qualified low because Stroll took him out. It's just a really messy weekend for them, and I really think they could lose 6th place now to Haas, who, yeah, sure, they're not scoring big points like Williams did this weekend, but they're chipping away very, very slowly. They're not that far behind anymore. And I thought that Haas had given up the ghost back in Spa or something like that, but no, they're back in the game. And Tsunoda and Ricciardo, there's very little they can do about it, because that car is just gone. That used to be in Q3, that Rabi. Q3! And going back to Stroll, oh dear. This is some more calmer-headed Lance's way, isn't it, after his mid-season gloating? Not only did he not score points or get into Q3 like Alonso did with relative ease, he also caused a collision with Tsunoda. Not a tidy weekend at all. There wasn't really much else to say. He said that he didn't have any pace in the car, he really couldn't get handle on it, and Lance admittedly has not had a good time of it in Baku, because in 2021 he had that freak accident on the straight with the tyres giving out on him. It's just not a really good track. He just blew all of his good luck in that first Grand Prix in 2017. He got that podium, and then after that he's had very little fortune. So maybe he should have just eked out that potential instead of just doing it all, putting it all on black in the first race. Seriously, Adrian cannot come soon enough for this kid. And then on top of that, he was having brake issues. And here at Baku, you kind of need those. Then we got Lewis Hamilton. Another letdown of a Sunday after some really good ones this season. Friday seems pretty good. He's got a good handle on things. And then come Saturday, he falls off a cliff and he can barely do anything in comparison to George. And it just looks really odd. I think at one point, he was almost out in Q1. And I think the reality is actually starting to sink in that he is leaving Mercedes. The team is now starting to look away from him and instead looking to 2025 with Kimi Antonelli and George Russell leading the team. And that is a bit of a culture shock for Hamilton because he's not had to experience this in a long time. Sure, he was experiencing something similar at McLaren, but that deal came about almost right at the end of the season, so there was little lead-in time or him to accept that he was leaving, and also he was happy to leave. Whereas with this, at Mercedes, he's been there for so long, it's still a shock, even though he's keen to get on with his situation at Ferrari. I know people are going to be thinking, oh, there's sabotage, the tyre temperatures. Well, ultimately, if Lewis thinks that there's something going on here, that there are shenanigans at play, surely, as Ted Kravitz pointed out in the Ted's Notebook, Lewis has access to the black box that contains the data about tyre temperatures and the blankets. Surely he has the ability to ask, I'd like to see that data, please, and I want to see if there's something going on between my blankets and George's blankets. I think he has enough authority in that team to request that information, and if there is something going on here, he should be able to call them out on it, but that hasn't happened. We haven't seen the evidence in full detail yet, so again, like I mentioned in George's section, why would they be doing this to Lewis? Is it to undermine him for next year? To make Ferrari think, we've got a really bad driver? No, of course not, because Red Bull, now, they look really, really bad. And if Mercedes can just get consistent points, whereas Red Bull struggle or only have one driver scoring meaningful points, Mercedes could be in with a shout for third and beating Red Bull down to fourth. I mean, that's very unlikely, but the chance is there now. Mercedes are now in the 300 club, and Red Bull are struggling, and Ferrari, McLaren, it looks like they're going for the win, so why doesn't Toto just take a cheeky punt and go, you know what, maybe we can get one back on Red Bull and say we can beat them in the Constructors. That'd be cathartic, yes. So again, if there's something wrong, Lewis should just ask for the data. Much like how Max Verstappen probably would like to see the data which went into Aston Martin choosing Adrian Newey for next year and beyond. And whether or not he can get in on that action for that and the World Endurance Championship that Aston Martin are taking part in, which is something I discussed more of in this video that you can start right now.